racing, but life's hard, girl, give me a minute. Blessings like this grow and they grow tenfold. You ain't never slowed, I ain't never home, cause I'm on the road doing world shows. Gotta go off. Me and Lou probably drove out to slide down on your bitch, and I take her down. She sucking dick before we dip, but it's more to life than that shit. Dreams dying on my mattress. I'm living better when I'm chasing after, wearing a crown on my head like a pageant. Sending respects to my elders. So many stars on my mind, I'm feeling like Patrick. Tragic, starting the ways as a catalyst. Shibuya all up in my catalog. 7 to the 7-7, nigga. Ain't many do it better than a nigga. Milk and honey, gotta be closer to heaven now. Lifting my head up, hold it down.
Hey, how y'all doing today? Welcome to Investing with Loui P. I'm your host, Loui P. And before we start, I'd like to introduce the wine for today. It's the Stella Rosa Red. And it's a pretty good wine selection. It's sweet, but I think they add sugar to this. So a lot of y'all wondering, I'm gonna be a millionaire by 2020. And of course it's about investing, because this segment is about investing. And it's simple, I'm gonna just say it plain out. It's gold.
What I really think is gold is a symbol not of wealth per se, but about power.
But what's really the difference? Doesn't wealth convey power and power can convey wealth?
I'm really rich.
Mansa Musa, who ruled the West African Empire of Mali, and in 1324-ish, he left his home and made the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. He brought with him an entourage of over 1,000 people, some sources say 60,000, and most importantly, 100 camel loads of gold. I wish it had been donkeys so I could say he had 100 ass loads of gold, but no, camels, right. So along the way, Mansa Musa spent freely and gave away lots of his riches. Most famously, when he reached Alexandria, at the time one of the most cultured cities in the world, he spent so much gold that he caused runaway inflation throughout the city that took years to recover from.
Donald Trump is renting out the 50th floor of 40 Wall Street for 10 years to APMEX, American Precious Metals Exchange, and accepting 3 32-ounce gold bars as a security deposit.
Well, sadly, we all know what's happening to the dollar. The dollar is going down, and it's not a pretty picture, and it's not being sustained by proper policy and proper thinking. This was an opportunity, and maybe an opportunity to show people what's happening with the dollar so that we can do something about it.
Michael Haynes, CEO of APMEX, is the mastermind who hatched this plan.
To us, cash, gold, they're basically the same asset. As we were negotiating this, we went to Mr. Trump, who I think is a very smart guy, and we presented him with some data, and you just heard him speak and say, it didn't take me very long to say, yes, I want the gold instead of the cash.
Gold was used over thousands of centuries. Gold is mentioned in the Bible and in the Constitution. If you look up gold in the Constitution, it actually says in the Constitution that gold and silver are the only money to be utilized to pay debt. Only money to be utilized to pay debt. And I know you thinking like, how can that be when I use dollars to pay for my debt? And it says we only supposed to utilize gold and silver in the Constitution. That's crazy, right? And I also researched that only 3% of Americans own gold. 3%, that's wild, right? But in the Constitution, it says them are the only money to be utilized. So, I found that pretty, odd. So if you didn't know, our financial system is flawed and it's designed to keep us poor. And I'm going to show you why gold is such a great investment, and why our financial system is flawed, and why you will gain wealth off of investing in gold. And it's not even investment, it's a wealth builder. It's insurance for your wealth. So I'm gonna show you all that. Alright, so before I can get in depth, you need to know 4 things. You need to know the Federal Reserve, what is the Federal Reserve job, interest rates, what is interest rates, quantitative easing, and you also need to know the bank. What does the bank do? What is the bank job?
The Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States, and it's commonly called the Fed. Europe has the European Central Bank, or ECB, and other countries have institutions that play similar roles. Most central banks have two important jobs. First, they regulate and oversee the nation's commercial banks by making sure the banks have enough money in their reserve to avoid bank runs. Their second job, and the job we're going to focus on today, is to conduct monetary policy, which is increasing or decreasing the money supply to speed up or slow down the overall economy. Monetary policy is what makes the Fed and the Fed chair so influential.
Let's start with interest rates. An interest rate is the price of borrowing money. When banks lend money, they expect to be repaid the amount they lent, which is called the principal, and a percentage of the principal to cover inflation and to make some profit. That percentage is called the interest rate. The number of car loans, student loans, home loans, and business loans that get made depends on interest rates. When interest rates are low, borrowers will find it easier to pay back loans, so they'll borrow more money and spend more. When interest rates are high, borrowers will borrow less and therefore spend less. In the US, the Fed doesn't have the power to tell banks what interest rate to charge customers. So instead, the Fed manipulates interest rates by changing the money supply. If the Fed increases the money supply, there'll be plenty of money for banks to loan out. Borrowers will shop around for the best deal on a loan, and banks will be forced to lower interest rates because they're going to have to compete, or else no one's going to borrow from them. A decrease in the money supply has the opposite effect. Less money supply means that banks have less money to loan out, so they're going to try to get the highest interest rate possible. So less money, higher interest rates. If the central bank wants to speed up the economy, they can increase the money supply, which will decrease interest rates and lead to more borrowing and spending. That's called expansionary monetary policy. If the central bank wants to slow down the economy, they decrease the money supply, less money available will increase interest rates and decrease spending. That's called contractionary monetary policy.
So now you know what the Federal Reserve does. The Federal Reserve, manipulates the money supply. It's the one that gives the banks money. And you heard what interest rates are. I'm pretty sure most of y'all know what interest rates are. But interest rates is how the bank makes their money back. It's how the banker, the lenders make their money back. So if you listen to the video, it says when interest rates are low, a lot of people tend to borrow money or get loans because it's easier to pay back because interest rates are low. If the interest rates are high, then less people get loans or buy things. Borrow money because it's harder to pay back. So how the Fed manipulates that, they either give the bank a lot of money or they give the banks less money. If you give the bank a lot of money, then the bank has to make profit off all that money, so they're going to make the interest rates very low, so a lot of people can rush in and borrow money. If they have less money, they're going to make the interest rates high, so it's harder. So it makes less people to come in and borrow money. So that's how the Feds work. That's how interest rate work. You know how the bank work. Quantitative easing.
And we saw already in the last video, if the Fed does not like the rate that they're borrowing to each other, and if even announcing the federal funds rate does not say, hey, it doesn't cause the banks to say, hey, the Fed's going to intervene if we don't lend to each other at that rate, the Fed can actually intervene. It can go out there, perform open market operations, and buy usually treasury securities out from just the general market. And what that does is it increases the amount of cash that is in circulation, which decreases the demand for cash, increases the supply, and it should lower the interest rate. And the Fed usually cares about getting that interest rate within a certain zone, around a certain target.
All right, so another thing to note is when I said, you saw when I said the Federal Reserve gives the banks a lot of money or less money. So when you put your money into the bank, the bank is already making profit off of your money, your dollars. So if you got 30,000 in the bank, that money is circulating. You don't have basically in a specific place where it'd be like such and such 30,000 right here. So if they have a customer, Susie, she need a house loan, or John need an auto loan, that money is going towards them so they can make profit off that money. Banks are also, they use your money to put in stocks 401k, stocks, that has to do with the US stock market and things like that. So your money is always circulating. So money just doesn't sit in the bank. Money just don't sit there. It don't sit there and just stay still. Money is always circulating. It's always circulating because they have to make profit off that money. Knowing that, savers and depositors, you're providing the bank with an unsecured loan, meaning you're providing the bank with money that's in circulation, like I said. So it's an unsecured loan, meaning basically the bank doesn't have to give you money back. So when you give the bank money, it's not your money anymore. So if that bank was to go under and it had no more money, they don't have to pay you back. They don't.
During the Great Depression, though, the Fed blew it. 73 years later, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke admitted, "We did it. We're very sorry. We won't do it again." So what did the Fed do wrong? Well, there are two things that keep the banking system healthy: confidence and liquidity. When customers deposit money in a bank, they need to feel confident they're going to get their money back. In the early years of the Great Depression, the Fed allowed several large banks to fail, which caused widespread panic and bank runs in other banks. The result was a third of all banks collapsed. The banks failed because they didn't have liquid assets, which is a fancy pants way of saying the banks had stocks, bonds, mortgages, but not cash money. So when depositors rushed to take money out, the banks couldn't pay. The Fed gets blamed for prolonging the Depression because it didn't give banks emergency loans, which would have increased the liquidity in banks and the money supply in general.
So you're giving money, you're giving the bank an unsecured loan. And it's actually, if you look up the Dodd-Frank Act, it's an act where basically it says what I just said about savers and depositors. You're providing the bank with an unsecured loan. So, meaning if anything was to happen, the bank can actually reach into your account and grab your money and use your money. And that's actually called a bailout. If you didn't know what a bailout is, look it up on Google. That's a bailout. The bank has the power to go into your account and grab your funds if needed to. All right, so I actually have an article here from, Messman, and 2 big reasons not to keep your cash in the bank. So I'm actually going to read the first little article. It's bad enough depositing your money into a bank account and earning essentially zero interest on it, so it means you're not getting any profit off of putting your money in the bank. Or in some countries, you're having negative interest rates. It's even worse knowing that once you deposit your money in the bank, it's not really yours anymore. You have turned over your property to the bank in return for a debt claim. You became an unsecured creditor holding an IOU. Everybody know what an IOU is. An IOU. Worst of all, there's the bail-in. They got bail-ins and bailouts. So bail-in, which we all became familiar with during the 2013 banking collapse in Cyprus. Some unsecured depositors got half of their money back. They got half of it back. Not the whole thing, they got half of it back. Although at the bank, customers received nothing of the deposits over the insured amount. So, like I said, the bank does not have to pay your ass back. You feel me? They don't have to pay you back. It's in the Frank Dodd Act. You're providing the bank with an unsecured loan, so your money can be touched. Alright, so let me go back to the gold note. A lot of people don't know that the dollar was actually backed by gold. Meaning you can go to the bank and you can trade in your dollar for gold. The dollar was actually like a receipt, like a receipt for your actual money. So what made the dollar so valuable, that it was backed by gold. Knowing the dollar was backed by gold, we then became the world reserve currency. What does that mean? other countries like Europe, France, Russia, China, they have to make purchases in oil. If they want to buy oil, they have to have dollars to buy oil. That is the petrodollar. Look up the petrodollar.
The simple definition of a petrodollar is the revenue from oil in mainly Middle Eastern countries, a revenue that is denominated in US dollars, not the currency of the countries where the oil comes from. All those nations that export their oil must sell it in dollars, so if the dollar loses value, so does their oil. But countries also peg their real currency to the dollar. That means fixing their currency with the dollar. So if the dollar fluctuates, so does their currency. If the dollar value lowers, so do the goods and services of that country. This ensures those countries don't experience wild swings in inflation or deflation. So what exactly is the relation between petrodollars and real dollars? Welcome to this episode of the Infographic Show, How Petrodollars Affect the US Dollar. We're told that the beginnings of this petrodollar system was in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. This conference was one of the big events of the 20th century because it's when it was agreed that the new global currency would be the US dollar. America would be the only country that could print this currency. This is when we saw the formation of both the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. As always, the website The Balance gives a very detailed account of what this would mean. The Balance explains if a country's currency value became too weak relative to the dollar, the bank would buy up its currency in foreign exchange markets. That would lower the currency's supply and raise its price. If the currency became too high, the bank would print more. That would increase the supply and lower its price. 43 countries signed up in an effort to rebuild the world after a devastating world war and to cooperate better with each other in terms of trade. The Bretton Woods website tells us it was felt by the leaders of the Allied countries, particularly the US and Britain, that a multilateral framework was needed to overcome the destabilizing effects of the previous global economic depression and trade battles. It ended anyway in 1971, when the US suffered what is called stagflation, and that means a combination of inflation and recession. This had a negative effect on nations that belong to what is called the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Most of the member countries are in the Middle East, with others being in Central America and Africa. Then in 1979, we got something called the US-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation. In that agreement, Saudi Arabia agreed to use American dollars for their oil transactions. These dollars would get back into America through contractors, and so they were what are called recycled petrodollars. This deal with Saudi Arabia was the start of this petrodollar. Was this good for the US? Investopedia tells us the petrodollar system elevated the US dollar to the world's reserve currency, and through this status, the United States enjoys persistent trade deficits and is a global economic hegemony. We all know that in the world, the most in-demand resource is oil. It makes oil-rich countries very wealthy, and it's priced in dollars that makes the USA's currency the most dominant currency in the world. Some say this gives the USA something called exorbitant privilege, which means, according to Investopedia, the USA can perpetually finance its current account deficit by issuing dollar-denominated assets at very low rates of interest, as well as becoming a global economic hegemony. The USA can just print its own money, which is nice for the USA, as it can pay off its massive debt with that money. Imagine you were broke, but could just borrow and then just go to the money tree in the garden to pay off the debt. There are many critics of this system, with one economist writing, "The amount of debt, leverage, deceit, corruption, and fraud in the economic markets, financial system, and in the energy industry are off the charts." Another bonus for the USA is that it can just buy its oil with its own products, which might mean massive construction contracts, expensive military planes, or technologically advanced tanks.
Petrodollar, you have to buy oil in dollar, USD. That's what that what makes our dollar so valuable, because it's the world reserve currency. A lot of people don't know that Saddam Hussein actually tried to go back on this by trading. He wanted to sell his oil in euros, and everybody know what happened to Saddam Hussein. I mean, look it up. I mean, it's not even really a big secret anymore. You can look it up. It's not really hidden. We killed Saddam Hussein because he tried to sell euros.
So the U.S. will often tap Saudi Arabia, which is the largest oil exporter in OPEC. They control 25% of OPEC's oil exports. They'll tap them and say, you know, hey, can you raise your oil production, which lowers the oil price. That hurts countries that rely on oil export revenue like Russia, Iran, Venezuela, countries that, you know, the United States and Saudi both dislike. And, you know, this goes as deep as, you know, in 2002, Saddam Hussein tried to sell oil in euros, and the U.S., that was a threat to the petrodollar system, and the U.S. invaded Iraq over that. In 2011, Muammar Gaddafi tried to create a gold-backed dinar currency for the African continent, and NATO promptly killed him. So this is a very lucrative business, and it all goes back to this petrodollar system. That relationship needs to be maintained in order for both U.S. and Saudi to profit.
All right, so knowing that, keep that in mind, that our dollar is the world reserve currency. It still is the world reserve currency, and it became the world reserve currency because it was backed by gold. Remember that now. Remember.